Welcome back to Process Cast with Mark Anderson and Samantha Blake, your go-to podcast for insights into business process management and the technologies transforming the way we work. In this episode, Samantha and Mark dive into a business process you can import into your HEFLO account for free. Click the link in the description to get it.
Okay, so you sent me over this termination employment.pdf file, and wow, it's pretty intense stuff.
Yeah, it is.
All the things that go on when an employee leaves a company,
right?
Like, I mean, whether it's resignation or the company decides that they have to let somebody go.
For sure.
So what we're going to do today is look at all of that and try to really understand. What are the key steps?
Yeah.
And who's involved in this process?
Absolutely.
And it really takes you from the very beginning, like the initial notification that you're leaving,
right,
or the company's letting you go, all the way through like literally your last paycheck, and making sure you're off the computer systems,
right?
Everything. It's
all the IT stuff,
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's it's interesting to see how much goes on sort of behind the scenes. When somebody says I'm leaving, or we're letting you go.
Yeah.
There's a lot that happens.
That's right. So let's just start right at the very beginning. And the document sort of lays out that there are really sort of two paths here.
Yes.
It starts with either a voluntary, decision, a resignation, or what they call an involuntary. The company's making that the dismissal.
Right.
So let's just start with resignation. Somebody says, I'm out of here. I'm moving on. I'm at, greener pastures, whatever it might be. And they typically submit a resignation form.
Yes.
Is that always, after they've had a conversation with their manager? Or does that sometimes just happen,
It can happen either way.
Okay.
Sometimes somebody will, go to their manager first.
Right.
And say, hey, I've, decided to resign.
Yeah.
Or sometimes it happens with the form as the first step.
Got it.
But yeah, the form is the first kind of official thing.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, while it always includes the resignation date, when you're going to leave, it can also optionally include the reasons why you're leaving.
Oh, interesting.
So that's an interesting little...
So it's not just a one-liner.
It's not just like, I quit.
Yeah, like, see, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so then, and as you were pointing out, it doesn't end there.
No.
Because then the manager and HR have to validate that resignation. So what are they looking for when they're looking at that going, okay, is this a valid resignation?
Well, they're just making sure that all the fields are filled out properly, that the date's clear.
Okay.
And there's nothing sort of ambiguous or,
yeah,
weird about it.
No mistakes.
Yeah. And then there's actually a decision point where it's resignation valid. ?
Wow.
And it could be rejected if it's, if something's wrong with it or missing.
Interesting.
You have to go back and fix it and resubmit it.
So I guess even though it's, somebody's decision to leave, there's still a process.
There's a process you got to
make sure that you got to do it right.
Done correctly.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So then let's look at the other scenario.
Okay.
Where the company says, we're going to have to let you go.
Okay.
A dismissal.
Yeah.
So how does that typically get started?
Well, in that case, the manager would usually formally notify the employee. And the documentation says often this involves a dismissal letter outlining, the reasons why they're being terminated and the date, the effective date.
Right.
And then there's a termination request document that needs to be filled out.
Okay.
Which can be done by the manager or by HR or sometimes both.
Got it.
But that will have, all the details, the employee's details, the reason for dismissal, the termination date.
Right. And just like with the resignation, there's a validation stage here too.
Yes, there is.
But I noticed in the document, it's primarily HR that does this.
That's right. Yeah.
What are they looking at here?
Well, they're looking at a lot of things. One is accuracy, making sure everything's, correct. But also legal compliance, making sure that everything's being done according to the law.
You don't want to be, breaking the law by dismissing somebody.
No, you really don't. Right. There can be big problems if you do.
Right. So we have these two kind of very different starting points.
Yes.
But then it seems like once that initial, request, whether it's a resignation or dismissal, is validated, there are some processes that are pretty much the same.
That's right.
So what are some of those overlapping steps that happen regardless of how the departure began?
Well, one of the first things is it says IT assets and credentials.
Right.
So HR will typically notify IT, and security to start the process of recovering company equipment.
Like the laptop,
security badges, that kind of thing.
Yeah, badge, anything like that.
Yeah.
And also to deactivate their, access to systems.
Right, so they can't get into the network.
Can't get into the network, can't get their email.
Can't get their email, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, for security reasons. Yeah, you don't want somebody who just left to still have access.
Yeah, exactly.
To all that stuff.
Especially if they were dismissed.
Yeah. Okay, and then there's this other thing, outstanding debts notification.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one.
What is that all about?
So HR notifies the finance department.
Okay.
Or whoever handles the money.
Got it.
To check if the employee has any outstanding debts to the company.
Like what kind of debts?
Well, it could be things like if they took out a personal loan through the company.
Oh, right.
Or if they have any unpaid expenses.
Okay.
Maybe they traveled for work.
Business trip.
Yeah, and they haven't been reimbursed yet.
Right.
So they want to catch that early on.
Okay.
So it can all be settled up in the final,
Right. So we're starting to see how all these different departments are involved in this.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's a very cross-functional thing.
That's right. So now the document goes into a lot of detail about this financial reconciliation. It seems like there are a lot of moving parts here.
Yeah. This is where it gets really down to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah. So what's the first step in that process?
So the first thing is to cancel benefits and deductions.
Okay.
So HR and payroll, they're going to work together to stop things like health insurance premiums, retirement contributions, loan repayments. All that stuff needs to stop being deducted from their paycheck.
Right.
Once they're no longer an employee. Otherwise, you're paying for their health insurance when they're not working there anymore.
Yeah, or they're still paying on a loan.
Yeah.
That,
right, exactly.
shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there's this wait for financial verification.
Yes.
What are they waiting for at this point?
So at this point, they're basically waiting for confirmation that the employee's financial status with the company has been checked.
Okay.
And that everything's good to go.
Like they don't owe any money or...
Yeah, or if they do, it's all been accounted for.
Right.
So usually finance would give that confirmation.
Right.
And then HR or payroll can move forward with calculating the final payments.
Okay, so that leads us to the calculate payments step.
Yes, this is a big one.
This is a big one.
This is where they figure out exactly how much money the employee is owed.
For their last paycheck.
For their last paycheck, yeah.
Right.
And it can include their regular wages or salary, any accrued vacation time.
Okay.
Maybe severance pay if they're eligible. Any outstanding bonuses or commissions.
Got it.
And all of this has to be done according to company policies and, of course, all the legal requirements, like federal and state laws.
Right. So once they've got all those figures worked out, then they have to actually update the payroll system to reflect this termination and these final payments.
Right.
Why is that so important?
Well, it's important for a few reasons. One, it officially records the termination in the company's records.
Right.
It makes sure the final payments are processed correctly. And it prevents any future payments or deductions from being made to the former employee.
You don't want them to accidentally get another paycheck.
No, you don't.
Right. That would be bad.
Okay, so then after that, it looks like there's this employee termination processed message.
Yes.
Who sends that out?
Usually that comes from either HR or finance.
Okay.
And it basically says, okay, everything's done.
It's official.
It's official. The employment has ended.
Got it.
And then other tasks can start happening based on that.
Like what?
Well, one of them is the verify outstanding debts task.
Okay, so we talked about that a little bit earlier.
Yeah, we did.
But this seems like it's happening later in the process.
Right, it is.
So what's going on here?
So earlier, it was just a notification, like
Okay.
heads up, hey, somebody's leaving, check their finances.
Right.
Now the financial analyst is actually digging into the records, making sure there are no unpaid loans or any company property that hasn't been returned.
Like maybe they had a company car or something.
Or some expensive equipment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
So they're just making sure that everything's squared away.
Before they cut that last check.
Right.
Okay, and then once they've done that, we get the message, debt verification completed.
Yes.
So it seems like this whole financial reconciliation process is about making sure everything balances out.
It is.
That the company and the employee are both clear on who owes what.
Yeah, it's all about fairness and accuracy.
And making sure everything's done by the book.
Yeah, you don't want any surprises.
Okay, so let's go back to IT for a minute.
Okay.
We talked about this IT system access management thing.
Right.
And it looks like that termination confirmed message we were just talking about.
Mm-hmm. That's what kicks things off for IT.
Okay, so what happens first?
So typically the service desk will immediately disable user access and email.
Okay.
So their network login is deactivated.
Okay.
And their email account is shut down. And this is usually an automated process.
So it happens like that?
Yeah, it's immediate.
That's interesting.
For security reasons.
Right, you don't want to wait,
Yeah.
a week for that to happen.
Yeah.
Okay, and then beyond that, there's this revoke credentials of systems task.
Yes.
And this is handled by the system coordinator. So what's the difference here?
So this is where they go beyond just the basic network and email.
Okay.
And they start removing access to all the other systems the employee might have had access to.
Like what kind of systems?
Oh, internal databases.
Okay.
Cloud services, project management, software, CRM systems.
Wow, so it's really anything they might have used for their job.
Anything and everything.
Right.
So they're making sure all those doors are closed.
Right.
So the employee can't get back in.
Yeah, digitally, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got all the digital stuff covered, but then there's also the physical stuff.
The return of company assets.
Yes, so who's in charge of that?
That's usually handled by the service desk.
Okay.
And they're responsible for collecting all the company-owned items the employee had.
Like what?
Well, the laptop, the phone security badges, maybe even physical documents or equipment,
right,
depending on the job.
Yeah.
And they usually use checklists to make sure they get everything back.
Makes sense.
And then they log everything that's been returned.
Okay, so once they've gathered all that up, then they have to communicate asset and credential return.
Right.
So who needs to know about this?
Well, they'll usually tell HR,
Okay.
the IT department,
Uh-huh.
and the employee's manager.
Okay.
Just so everyone's in the loop.
Right.
And they know that the process is moving forward.
And if there's anything missing,
exactly,
they'll know about it.
Yeah.
Okay. It's really incredible when you look at this document, how many different people and departments are involved.
It really is. It's a huge undertaking.
Yeah. And the document actually has this section where it lists out all the different performers.
Oh, yeah, the key players.
Yeah. So can you just quickly run through who all those people are and what they generally do when an employee leaves?
Sure. So first you have the employee.
Okay.
They're the ones who, initiate the resignation if they're leaving voluntarily.
Right.
They submit the forms and they return company property.
Got it.
Then you have the manager.
Okay.
They validate resignations or they start the dismissal process. They often do exit interviews,
Right.
To get feedback from the employee.
Yeah.
And they help with the handover of responsibilities.
So that somebody else can do the work.
Exactly.
Right.
Then there's HR.
Okay.
They're really the central hub of this whole thing.
Yeah. So they seem to touch everything.
Yeah. They do all the paperwork, manage benefits, ensure legal compliance, and they communicate with everyone.
Right.
Then you have the financial analyst.
Okay.
They do the financial verification, check for debts, and calculate the final payments.
Right.
Then there's a service desk. They handle the physical IT assets.
Like collecting the laptops.
Yeah, and they also do the initial deactivation of accounts.
Like the network and email.
Right.
Okay.
And then finally, there's the system coordinator.
Okay.
And they're the ones who handle all the other system access,
Right.
making sure that the employee is completely locked out of everything.
Got it. So it really is like a big team effort.
Absolutely.
It's not just as simple as saying goodbye in your last day.
Well, no, it's much more complicated than that.
Right. So this overview has really helped me understand all the behind-the-scenes stuff that happens.
Yeah, it's definitely eye-opening.
It really is. And I think, whether you're an employee, a manager, or just somebody who's curious about how organizations work, it's good to know about this.
It is. And it makes you think about, what's the most critical part of this whole process?
Yeah.
Like, what's the one thing that a company absolutely has to get right?
Mm-hmm.
And what could happen if they mess it up?
That's a great question for everyone to think about. What are the potential consequences if these steps aren't handled correctly?
Exactly.
for listening to ProcessCast. This episode was brought to you by HEFLO, the BPM platform that empowers businesses to document, automate, and optimize their processes with AI. Experience the intelligence to simplify complex business processes and accelerate your growth with our complete management solution. Visit heflo.com to learn more. Be sure to follow ProcessCast for more insights on business process management, and don't forget to share this episode with your network. Until next time.